Tomas Reyes stood in the center of the Galactic Tribunal chamber and waited for the galaxy to judge him. The chamber was vast, a perfect sphere of polished obsidian, 300 meters in diameter, with tiered rings of seating rising from the floor to the ceiling. 400 species occupied those rings. 400 delegations. 400 sets of eyes fixed on the single human standing alone on the central platform. The air was thick with mixed atmospheres, filtered through invisible barriers that kept each species comfortable while allowing sound and light to pass freely. Translation matrices hummed at frequencies below hearing, converting every word into 400 languages simultaneously. Tomas did not look up at the tiers. He looked straight ahead, at the three judges seated on the elevated dais before him. They were ancient, venerable, representatives of the three oldest species in the galactic community. Their faces were unreadable. Their postures were rigid. They had presided over this tribunal for decades. They had heard thousands of cases. They had delivered verdicts that shaped borders, ended wars, and defined justice for 400 civilizations. Today, they would judge a human. High Arbiter Kale Vrenth spoke first. His voice was deep, resonant, amplified by the chamber's acoustics so that every syllable reached every ear in every language. Tomas Reyes of the United Earth Directorate. You stand accused of sabotage resulting in 3 fatalities aboard Vrelian Station, 9 on the 17th day of the 3rd cycle, year 2247. The evidence has been presented. The testimony has been heard. Do you contest the charge? Tomas breathed. The air tasted metallic, recycled, foreign. He had been in custody for 11 days. 11 days in a cell designed for a species twice his height. 11 days of silence. 11 days of waiting. He had not slept well. He had not eaten much. But his mind was clear. Clearer than it had been in months. Clearer than it had been since the moment he made the choice. I do not contest the charge, he said. His voice was steady, quiet, carried by the translation matrix to 400 species who had never heard a human speak in this chamber before. I damaged the reactor coupling on Vrelian Station 9. 3 people died in the resulting fire. I did it. A murmur rippled through the tiers. Not shock, satisfaction. The murmur of a tribunal that has received a confession and can now proceed to sentencing. Open and shut. Clean. Efficient. The machinery of justice turning as it was designed to turn. Kale Vrenth nodded. The accused has confessed. The facts are established. We will now activate the Veritas Core for formal judgment. The Veritas Core. It hung suspended in the exact center of the chamber, 10 meters above Tomas's head. A sphere of black crystal, 3 meters in diameter, perfectly smooth, perfectly dark. It had no seams, no joints, no visible mechanism, no power source, no interface. Simply was. Ancient beyond measurement, older than the tribunal, older than the galactic community, older than most of the species sitting in the tiers. It had been found drifting in the void between galaxies 12,000 years ago, inert, silent, waiting. When brought into proximity with a dispute, it activated. It read, judged, it spoke. Its verdicts were absolute, unappealable, final. No species had ever successfully challenged a core verdict. No species had ever bribed it, tricked it, or influenced it. It was the closest thing the galaxy had to objective truth. And now it would judge Tomas Reyes. 2 attendants approached the core's suspension field. They performed the activation ritual. A sequence of gestures passed down through millennia, meaningless to modern science but necessary to wake the artifact. The core responded. Light bloomed inside the black crystal. Not white, not gold. A color that had no name in any of the 400 languages. A color that existed below vision, felt rather than seen. A resonance filled the chamber. Low, steady, patient. The sound of something very old paying very close attention. Tomas looked up at it. He had read about the core, studied its history, understood its function. But reading was not feeling. The resonance was not sound. It was presence. The presence of something that had watched civilizations rise and fall for 12,000 years and had never once been wrong. Something that saw through lies, through performance, through the careful construction of innocence or guilt. Something that saw truth. He closed his eyes. He let the resonance wash over him. He did not resist. He did not hide. He offered himself to it completely. The act, the intent, the weight, all of it. Everything he had carried alone for 6 months. Everything he had refused to speak aloud because speaking it would have meant saying, "I chose who died." The core read him. The reading began with the surface. The core scanned Tomas's neural patterns, his memories of the event, the corridor, the reactor room, the coupling, the tools in his hands, the heat, the smell of ozone and burning insulation. The 3 technicians in the adjacent maintenance bay who did not know what was coming, who could not be warned, who could not be evacuated, who died in the fire that he started deliberately, precisely, with full knowledge of what it would cost. The core read the act, catalogued the damage, the rupture point, the fire suppression failure, the 3 deaths. Engineer Senevrel, age 34. Technician Marin Kos, age 28. Maintenance worker Tira Len, age 41. Names, ages, lives. The core recorded them, held them, gave them weight. Then it went deeper, past the act, past the memory, into the why. The core read the 6 hours before the sabotage. The diagnostic reports Tomas had accessed. The reactor coupling's stress fractures. The cascade failure projection. The timeline. 6 hours until catastrophic rupture. The casualty estimate, 40,000. The evacuation time, 8 hours. The math that did not balance. The equation that had no clean solution. Only solutions with blood in them. Free. The core read the calculations. Not abstract. Not theoretical. The specific, terrible arithmetic of choosing between 3 deaths and 40,000. The way Tomas had run the numbers 7 times. Checked them. Rechecked them. Searched for an alternative. Found none. Accepted the unacceptable. Made the choice. Alone. In silence. In a maintenance corridor where no one could see his face. Where no one could witness the moment a man decided to kill 3 people to save 39,997. The core read the aftermath. The fire. The alarms. The screams. The 3 bodies recovered from the maintenance bay. The investigation. The suspicion. The arrest. The 11 days in custody. The silence. The refusal to explain. Because explaining would have meant justifying. And justifying would have meant saying their deaths were acceptable. Their lives were worth less than 40,000 others. And no human should ever have to say that. Not in a courtroom. Not to strangers. Not to the families of the dead. Not to the galaxy. So he said nothing. He said, "I did it." And he let the weight settle on his shoulders. And he waited. The core read all of this. And then it went deeper still. Deeper than the event. Deeper than the choice. Deeper than Tomas Reyes. It read backward. Through his childhood. Through the stories his grandmother told him about the resource wars. About the choices her parents made. About the smaller deaths that prevented larger ones. About the weight carried silently across generations. Through his education. Through the engineering principles that taught him systems fail and humans must sometimes choose which failure is survivable. Through his training. Through the ethical frameworks that acknowledged imperfect solutions and demanded courage in their execution. Through the cultural memory of a species that had spent 10,000 years breaking itself and putting itself back together, each time carrying the scars of the breaking, each time learning that survival required sacrifice, and that sacrifice required silence, and that silence required strength. The core read the chain. Not just Tomas. His ancestors. His culture. His species. 10,000 years of humans making impossible choices in dark rooms and quiet corridors and lonely moments where no one was watching and no one would understand and no one would thank them. 10,000 years of carrying weights that could not be shared. 10,000 years of choosing the smaller death so that others could live. 10,000 years of love expressed not in words but in the terrible, lonely arithmetic of sacrifice. The core read it all. every layer, every generation, every choice, every silence, every weight. And then it spoke. The resonance shifted. The unnamed color inside the crystal pulsed. The chamber fell silent. 400 species held their breath. The judges leaned forward. The attendants froze. Tomas opened his eyes. The core spoke. Not in words. Not initially. In feeling. A wave of understanding that washed through the chamber, bypassing language, bypassing translation, settling directly into the consciousness of every being present. A comprehension that was not intellectual but visceral. The feeling of standing in a maintenance corridor at 0300, holding a wrench, knowing that the next action will end 3 lives and save 40,000. The feeling of running the numbers 7 times and finding no alternative. The feeling of accepting the unacceptable. The feeling of acting alone because sharing the burden would have meant delaying the action and the delay would have meant everyone dies. The feeling of walking away from the fire and not looking back because looking back would have broken the resolve needed to carry the weight forward. The feeling of standing in a courtroom and saying, I did it, without explanation because the explanation is a wound that should not be reopened in public. The feeling of love so large it requires death. Love so terrible it cannot be spoken. Love so lonely it can only be carried. The feeling lasted 11 seconds. Then the core translated it into words, spoken in a voice that was not a voice, a resonance shaped into language, a truth given form. The accused is guilty of the act. A pause. The chamber exhaled. Guilty. Confirmed. Expected. The act was necessary. Another pause. Longer this time. The murmur that had begun to rise faltered. Necessary. The core had never used that word in conjunction with guilt. Never. In 12,000 years of verdicts. The act saved 39,997 lives. Silence. Total. Absolute. The kind of silence that has mass. That presses against the chest. That makes breathing conscious. 39,997. A number spoken with the precision of a calculator and the weight of a eulogy. The accused carried the weight of 3 deaths so that 40,000 could live. The accused did not act from malice. The accused acted from love. A love so large it required the death of 3. A love so terrible it could not be spoken aloud. A love so lonely it could not be shared. The judges stared. The tears stared. Tomas stared. His hands were at his sides. His face was still. But something behind his eyes had shifted. Something that had been locked tight for 6 months had cracked. Not broken. Cracked. Just enough to let the light in. Just enough to let the weight shift. Not disappear. Never disappear. But share. For the first time. Someone else had seen it. Someone else had named it. Someone else had understood. The verdict is guilty. And righteous. And forgiven. By this tribunal. By this galaxy. By the dead who lived because of his choice. Forgiven. The word hung in the air. Heavy. Warm. Impossible. Forgiven by the dead. How could the core speak for the dead? How could it claim their forgiveness? Unless it had read them too. Unless it had reached beyond the living, beyond the present, into the space where the dead reside, and asked them and received their answer. And the answer was forgiveness. Because they understood. Because they were part of the 40,000. Because they had lived the lives that Tomas had bought with 3 deaths. Because forgiveness was the only appropriate response to a love that large. The sentence is none. The debt is paid. The weight is carried. The man is free. The words settled into the chamber like snow. Quietly. Completely. Irreversibly. Covering everything. Changing the shape of everything. Making everything new. Tomas Reyes stood on the platform. The core's resonance faded. The unnamed color dimmed. The artifact returned to dormancy. The trial was over. The verdict was delivered. The sentence was pronounced. He was free. No one moved. 400 species. Thousands of individuals. Judges. Attendants. Observers. Diplomats. Journalists. Families of the dead. Families of the saved. No one moved. No one spoke. No one applauded. No one objected. No one filed an appeal. No one requested clarification. No one broke the silence. Because the silence was not empty. It was full. Full of the verdict. Full of the feeling. Full of 39,997 lives. Full of 3 deaths. Full of a love so large it required death. Full of a loneliness so deep it could not be shared until an artifact 12,000 years old reached into a man's soul and pulled it out for the galaxy to see. High Arbiter Kale Vrenth sat on the dais. His ancient face was wet, not with tears, with something older, something that predated tears, the moisture of recognition, of seeing something true and being unable to hold it without leaking. He had presided over this tribunal for 40 years. He had heard confessions, denials, pleas, threats, lies, truths, half-truths, performances. He had never heard this. He had never felt this. He had never been asked to forgive a guilty man for saving 40,000 lives. He had never been asked to sit with the weight of a love that killed. He had never been asked to declare righteousness in the same breath as guilt. He looked at Tomas. Tomas looked at him. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. The core had spoken. The silence was the acknowledgement. The silence was the acceptance. The silence was the verdict echoing in the space between heartbeats, settling into the bones, becoming part of the chamber's architecture, part of the tribunal's memory, part of the galaxy's understanding of what justice means when the math does not balance and the only solution is blood and the only person willing to spill it is standing alone in the center of the room saying, "I did it," without asking for absolution. The Vrelian delegation sat in the 3rd tier. They were the station's owners, the employers of the 3 dead, the victims of the sabotage. They had demanded justice. They had prosecuted the case. They had expected conviction. They had prepared statements of satisfaction, of closure, of righteous punishment. They sat in silence. Their statement drafts remained unspoken. Their satisfaction remained unexpressed. Their closure remained unachieved. Because the core had shown them something they had not asked to see, had not wanted to see, had not been prepared to see. The reason, the necessity, the love, the 40,000, the 3, the terrible arithmetic. And they could not hate it, could not reject it, could not demand punishment for a man who had saved their own people, their own employees, their own families. The 40,000 included their colleagues, their friends, their children. The 3 deaths had purchased their lives, and the core had named the purchase, and the naming made hatred impossible, made prosecution shameful, made the entire trial feel like a mistake, a misunderstanding, a failure of vision. They sat in silence, and in the silence they forgave, not because the core told them to, because the core showed them why. And the why was undeniable, and the forgiveness was involuntary, and the involuntariness was the proof that the verdict was true, proof that the love was real, proof that the weight was shared. Tomas Reyes stood on the platform, the silence wrapped around him, not oppressive, not punishing, holding him the way the core had held him during the reading, the way the verdict had held him. The way the 40,000 held him, the way the 3 held him. He was not alone anymore. The loneliness that had defined 6 months of silence had cracked. Not shattered, cracked. Just enough to let the galaxy in. Just enough to let the weight distribute. Just enough to let him breathe. He breathed. The breath was steady, deep, full. The first full breath he had taken in 6 months. The first breath that did not carry the weight alone. The first breath that acknowledged the forgiveness. The first breath that accepted the freedom. He was free, not because the tribunal declared it, because the core revealed it, because the galaxy witnessed it, because the silence confirmed it. Freedom was not a legal status. It was a shared understanding, collective release, a mutual acknowledgement that the debt was paid, the weight was carried, the love was seen, the sacrifice was honored, and the man was no longer required to bear it in solitude. He bowed, once, slowly, to the judges, to the tears, to the core, to the silence, to the 40,000, to the 3. Then he turned. He walked across the platform. His footsteps echoed in the obsidian sphere. Each step was measured, deliberate, unhurried. The walk of a man who was free, who knew he was free, who carried the freedom carefully, the way one carries something precious and fragile and irreplaceable. He reached the chamber door. It opened. He stepped through. The door closed behind him. The silence remained. The recording of the trial was archived in the Galactic Historical Repository within the hour. It became the most accessed file in the repository's 12,000-year history. Not immediately, not in the first day, in the first week, then the first month, then the first year. Species requested it, studied it, taught it, debated it, wept over it, sat in silence with it, returned to it, again and again, not for the verdict, for the feeling, for the 11 seconds of understanding that bypassed language and settled into the bones, for the glimpse into a human soul carrying a weight that no other species had been asked to carry in quite that way, for the reminder that justice is not always clean, that righteousness and guilt can coexist, that love can kill, that silence can speak, that an artifact 12,000 years old can see what 400 species missed. The Vrelian government issued a formal statement 3 days after the trial. It did not apologize. Apologies were insufficient. Instead, it established the Reyes Memorial Fund. Named for Tomas, not for the 3 dead, they had their own memorials, their own honors, their own grief. The fund was for the 40,000, for the lives saved, for the acknowledgement that those lives existed because of a choice made in darkness by a man who refused to explain it. The fund supported engineering safety research, reactor design, failure prevention, the kind of work that ensured no one would ever have to make Tomas's choice again, that the arithmetic would never again require blood, that the smaller death would never again be the only solution. Tomas Reyes did not attend the fund's establishment ceremony. He was invited. He declined. Politely, quietly, without explanation. He did not need the ceremony. He did not need the recognition. He did not need the gratitude. He had received what he needed in the chamber, in the silence, in the verdict, in the forgiveness, in the freedom. He returned to Earth, to his home, to his family, to the quiet life he had built before the choice, before the arrest, before the trial. He resumed his work, his routines, his relationships. He did not speak about the trial, did not write about it, did not give interviews, did not publish memoirs. The silence that had defined 6 months of custody extended into his freedom. Not as punishment, as preservation. The silence was sacred now. Sacred the way the choice had been sacred. Sacred the way the 3 deaths were sacred. Sacred the way the 40,000 lives were sacred. Some things are too heavy for words, too precious for performance, too true for public consumption. They belong to the silence, to the private space between heartbeats, to the quiet moments when the weight shifts and the breath comes full and the forgiveness settles and the freedom holds. He lived, quietly, fully, freely, carrying the weight, sharing the weight, honoring the weight, never forgetting the weight, never needing to speak the weight. The Veritas Core returned to dormancy after the trial. It hung in the center of the chamber, dark, silent, waiting. It had spoken. It had judged. It had revealed. It had forgiven. It had freed. And now it waited for the next dispute, the next accusation, the next confession, the next truth that needed to be seen, the next weight that needed to be named, the next love that needed to be recognized, the next silence that needed to be broken. It would wait, patiently, eternally, as it had waited for 12,000 years, as it would wait for 12,000 more, watching, reading, judging, speaking, forgiving, freeing. And in the chamber, in the obsidian sphere, in the tiered rings where 400 species had sat in silence, something had changed. Permanently, irreversibly, the chamber remembered, the tribunal remembered, the galaxy remembered, not the verdict, the feeling, the 11 seconds, the love, the weight, the freedom, the silence. They remembered that justice is not always clean, that righteousness and guilt can share the same breath, that love can require death, that silence can be the loudest truth, that a human can stand alone in the center of a room and carry a weight that breaks the machinery of judgment and remakes it into something truer, something kinder, something worthy of the name. They remembered, and in the remembering they changed, not dramatically, not visibly, not in ways that could be measured or legislated or broadcast, in ways that were quieter, deeper, more permanent, in the way a species changes when it has seen something true and cannot unsee it, in the way a civilization grows when it has been shown a love it did not know existed and cannot forget it, in the way a galaxy matures when it has been asked to forgive a guilty man for saving 40,000 lives and has discovered that forgiveness is not weakness but wisdom, not surrender but strength, not the end of justice but its beginning. The galaxy put a human on trial. The artifact delivered its verdict, and everyone was speechless, and in the speechlessness something was born, something that would outlast the trial, outlast the verdict, outlast the artifact, outlast the species that witnessed it, something that would live in the silence between heartbeats, in the weight carried quietly, in the love expressed through sacrifice, in the freedom earned through loneliness, in the forgiveness granted by the dead to the living, in the truth that some debts are paid not in punishment but in understanding, not in vengeance but in grace, not in noise but in the deep, permanent, sacred silence of a galaxy that has seen what humans carry and has decided, finally, to help carry it. The silence held, and it would hold, forever.